What crazy story do you need to tell?
Narrowly avoided being sent to prison for 10-20 years for several drug crimes, and instead paid minimum fines due to some quick thinking and taking a huge risk. Late to the party, but when I was in high school and the few years after, my primary source of income was selling pot. One day I was just hanging out at home with the GF. We went to the Circle K a few houses down and got some beer. The clerk, who I knew pretty well at this point, asked if he knew where I could get a dub sack. I said sure, and that I'd be back soon. I go home and forget about it. An hour or two later I'm like, oh shit, remember, weigh it out and go back. He had already given me the money, very important detail for later, so I waited until he had no customers. He came out and we went around the ice box, just smoking and chatting. I handed him the bag. Now there was no one around. Empty lot, except for this beat-up Volvo facing the record store next door. If I had been paying better attention, I may have noticed this Volvo had completely tinted windows, which seemed odd to do on a beat-up Volvo. Two men get out of the car and approach us. One tall, skinny guy wearing 100% denim and another guy who looks like Dog the Bounty Hunter in a beige sweater. They approach us and ask how we're doing. Me and Clark look at each other like, you know these guys. Then all of a sudden, the flash badges and yell, EPD, why are you under arrest? And cuff us, separate us, and search us. Beige Dog goes through my texts, finds a couple dubious ones, a few crumpled up 20s, starts trying to get me to admit to doing a lot of business today, blah blah. Then they surprise me by walking me and my GF back to my porch, saying they've seen me come and go quite a bit and just want to make sure you don't have a pound of heroin in there, and they'll just charge me with a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it will be jail and a felony. So here we are, on my front porch, me saying there's no way I will let them in my house, and to call my lawyer over and over. At one point, my roommate walks out, says hi, gets in his car and leaves. At this point, Dog explains that if I don't let him search the house, he's going to park a few squad cars on the lawn, extract everyone from the house and wait on a warrant, and they will charge everyone in the house with every little thing they find in any room. I now know this is not legal. Then I was just scared. My roommate that had just left was a total nerd with a great job, straight edge, rarely drank and never smoked or anything at all. I was terrified of him losing his job. Unfortunately for me, I had just had an opportunity to get a quip of mushrooms at a steal of a deal. My area was super dried up on mushrooms at the time, so I asked around and basically had all my deals set before I got it. This timing was perfect, because just 30 feet away on the coffee table of my bedroom was 1/4 of a pound of mushrooms, neatly weighted out into ounces and 1/8. Top that with all the pot in there, it wasn't looking pretty. So I proposed that I let one of them in to search just my bedroom and be done with it. I knew once I let them in they could do whatever, but I was out of options. Beige Dog agrees. Canadian Tuck stays with my GF, who looks terrified like, WTF are you doing at me? And Dog the Sweater Hunter enters with me. I lead him upstairs and walk right past my door, which thank God was closed, and into the straight edge guy's room. Dog completely turns it over, takes out drawers, turns the mattress over, the whole shebang. As he does this, I quietly turn off the computer monitor with a background of my roommate and his GF glaring on it. Guy finds nothing, sticks with his agreement, and walks me and my shit-eating grin back downstairs. My GF, probably assuming I'm going to prison for many years, is looking like she's about to die, but I'm just grinning. Guy still fucking charged me with a felony, then they leave. Long story short, paid a lot for a great atty who are friends with the prosecutor was. Since no money was seen to be exchanged, the charge was knocked down to deliverance of marijuana. The prosecutor recommended the minimum sentence. I paid a $121 fine, did 80 hours of community center at a local music venue, saw a ton of shows for free, and retired from selling. God, I hope someone reads this. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small town, like a few hundred residents, town in northern Australia. We started going to school, and after a few weeks we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their Ranger Hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined up to go into the hall and all the kids are joking and laughing. They open the doors and we all start walking in and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in, I looked up and on the walls was all this signs. Sinners must burn, the devil is coming for you, Christ is your only savior, stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern towns spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanatical in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy-looking old guy who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said we are going. By this time, it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights, we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a km from home, I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house, and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as fuck. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned nature rangers to us ever again. I did not have a car when I was at uni, which made going out with my friends a bit bothersome. I would constantly stumble home half drunk in the middle of the night or early morning, wait for the first train to leave, and so on. One day I was visiting friends, and the only way back home that late, must have been between 1 and 2 in the morning, was a train which followed some god-forsaken country route. My stop lay next to a small wood and a castle. Think 13th century Central European castle. I knew the way because I have played there a lot when I was a kid. You have to follow a trail through some fields, past the stables where horses are kept, through a wooded patch that dips into a slope, past the woods around the castle, then along a narrow road between 2 fields, past an abandoned gatekeeper's house that looks like a set straight out of a horror movie, until you reach a bridge where you need to pass underneath to rejoin civilization. There are no lights anywhere. I was still a bit drunk, and I considered just waiting for the next bus, but that would have been hours. It was summer, the weather was nice, and I thought, well, I know this path by heart, easy peasy, so I started walking. Everything was fine until I reached the slope. As soon as the terrain dipped, there was zero light. On my left were the woods, completely black. On my right, a hill covered in underbrush completely blocked the moon. I couldn't even see my own feet. There I was, shuffling forward like a complete idiot, only one stray branch away from breaking my ankle. It took me forever to reach the end of the slope. Now, you can imagine what it felt like to stumble in utter darkness in the woods at night. Every sound made me think I was about to get murdered at any moment. It was actually the thought of a former teacher of mine that kept me from panicking. He said that the forest is pretty much the safest place to be at night, because what kind of inept would-be killer would wait for a victim in the middle of nowhere? We'd be more likely to get mugged in a dark alley near the city center. So I tried to be rational. Eventually, the moon reappeared, and I was at least able to see a bit better. I was just walking toward the abandoned house, congratulating myself on my bravery, when I shit you not, someone jumps out of the woods to my right into my path. It was so quick, I wasn't even able to scream. A fucking jogger in full gear. In the middle of the night, in the woods, without light. He just ran along the road ahead of me as if he had night vision or something. Anyway, I got home unmurdered, swore I'd never do something like that again, and did the same exact thing, minus the jogger, a week later. I honestly wonder how I made it past 30. There was a kid I knew in primary school. I guess I'd call him a friend of mine, but honestly, he was kind of insane, and depending on who you asked, I'm sure some of the teachers would have told you he was bullying me. I got into quite a lot of trouble with him. Well, actually, technically it was mostly him who was getting into trouble, but I ended up in the principal's office so many times having to explain the crazy shit he and I used to get up to. On the one hand, he had a crazy vivid imagination. He'd spend lunchtime running around the school grounds, pretending to be in the thick of a battle in WW2 against the Germans, getting into epic firefights, etc. But he would get so into it, it was contagious, and I couldn't help but join in. He'd lead me into his imaginary fray, shouting, "Move, move, move. GINA80, get down, private." Then suddenly, at a moment's notice, he'd drop down to the ground and start crawling commando style through some shrubs with the most intense look on his face. And he had this crazy ability to construct very impressive little bases, basically huts, tents in the forest, mostly out of twigs, dead leaves and other stuff he'd just find laying on the ground. Try as I might, I could never build them as well as him. Hanging out with him was always an adventure, because when he got into something he was so into it, and I couldn't help but just join in and have a good time. On the other hand, he also wore steel cap boots to school, would repeatedly remind me that he was wearing steel cap boots, and would kick me in the shins with them to demonstrate. Pretty sure I came home with bruises on my legs multiple times. Pulled a box cutter on me one day on school grounds. Would have random outbursts of extremely aggressive behavior, such as pushing me up against a wall, red-faced and furious, and looking like he was about to lay into me unprovoked. Despite his sudden and frequent mood swings, he was actually a fun kid to hang out with a lot of the time. I'd hang out with him after school, and honestly, I think his mum was happy to see that he'd made a friend, because he tended to push other kids away with his behavior. The lunchtime war roleplay was always a blast, and it was great fun building stuff out of sticks in the bush, just because he got so into everything he did, and it was contagious. Joining in was always a blast. I ended up in the principal's office so often to resolve disputes between us. The principal would often ask why I continued to be friends with the guy. Honestly, my friendship with this kid gave me a little bit of an insight into how abusive relationships might form and how people can end up feeling trapped in them and keep coming back despite their better judgment. He moved to another state after 6th grade, and I never saw him again. He did send me one letter about a month after moving, though. Apparently, he wrote it at his school athletics carnival, told me how he missed hanging out with me, and was gushing about how much fun he was having competing in the events. He wrote that he had just come third in the 100m race and was currently coming second in the 200m race, WTF. I wrote back to him, but he never replied after that. Here goes, it's quite a long one. I'm from Belgium and have traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger. When I was still together with my ex-GF, we traveled a lot as well, but neither of us had been to the USA, so we told this to a befriended couple, and a few beers later, we started planning a trip to go on together, because another mutual friend was studying in Philadelphia for a year, and we might as well go visit him. First, we went to New York and Philly for a few days, then took a plane to LA, rented a car, and took a road trip through Cali, Nevada, and Utah. During this road trip, we'd often laugh about some of the dumb shit we'd heard or seen people do in America. We had a bunch of jokes about people in smaller villages and all kind of crazy stuff they might do. We had just been to Sequoia National Park, and we were looking for a place to spend the night and eat, because it was getting late. Found some old farmhouse where we could stay in one of the fixed-up cabins and asked the old lady who rented it to us where we could go and eat something. Mind you, this little town was called Pinehurst and had an extremely low population. She pointed us to the Pinehurst Lodge, which was basically the only restaurant bar store for miles. Went there, ate an amazing meal, and decided to grab some drinks afterwards and shoot some pool. As we were playing pool, this old giant approaches us, wearing a jeans shirt that said George W. Bush, picture of an eagle. He had a bushy mustache, looked very tough for his age, and we thought he was going to give us trouble about using the pool table and laughing too hard. He is to this day one of the kindest people I've ever met. He asked if we were having fun and if he could join us. He bought us moonshine, which we obviously thought was hilarious, and we bought him a few beers as well. Had a blast the entire evening. While we were playing and drinking, the phone behind the counter kept ringing, but none of us was paying attention to it. By 23h30, all of a sudden, a woman comes barging in with a gun in her hand, looks at us, and stomps over. I felt myself getting nervous and getting ready to react if I had to. She stops behind our new friend, grabs an empty beer bottle and smashes it on his head. We were all perplexed with what happened. She proceeded to shout insults at the man and started hitting him. He calmly tells her to relax, turns towards us, shook our hands, told us that if we ever came back to be sure to let him know so we could hang out again, and then went outside with the women's. We stood there, still trying to understand what just happened. The woman at the bar just shouts at us. That's his wife. He's a bit of a social butterfly, and she had already called 10 times to ask when he'd come home. We thought it was pretty cool and all, so we told her. Oh, okay. We're just going to leave as well then. It's getting quite late. Oh no, my dearies, it's best you stay a little while longer. The shouting you hear outside is still them arguing, and I can tell she's quite pissed at you guys because she blames you that he hadn't come home yet. And I have to say, it wouldn't be the first time she shot at someone for keeping him too long at the bar, so best you stay a little bit until they leave. So we stay about 30 more minutes, all the while they keep shouting outside. Then we hear a car start and see a white truck speed off. Within seconds, we see a second truck speed after the first one. This was in the mountains with very narrow and bendy roads, both cars just leaving at an insane speed. We hear the bartender say, "She drives our children to school with the bus, you know." This would never happen at home. 100% would go back to Pinewood Lodge in a few years. Edit, it was Pinehurst, checked link in comments and can confirm that was the place. Also national park and not natural. This happened in either the late 90s or early zeros. So my granddad got jiggy with another woman when he was on holiday once with a lady from Kiribati. Anyway, it produced a child, my aunt. Now several years ago my family decided that we would go and visit her in Kiribati. For those that don't know, it's on the equator. To get there we had to fly from Fiji on a tiny 50-seater twin-prop plane with one toilet at the front. Now being a kid with a lot of food allergies, I had eaten something that didn't quite sit right, mild case of food poisoning if you will. About half an hour into our flight, my stomach gives me that feeling where you know you won't stop what's coming, so I got up and went to the toilet. Halfway up the aisle all hell broke loose. I farted, which wasn't a fart, it was the beginnings of full-blown diarrhea. By the time I got into the toilet and locked the door, my undies were soaked. It was still flowing, I couldn't stop it. Now I was a good kid, so I didn't want to block the toilet, so I threw my undies in the rubbish and unloaded into the toilet. However, the amount that came out plus the amount of paper I had to use ended up blocking the toilet anyway, and it stunk. Really badly. I would have been in there for a good 15 minutes. Meanwhile, the entire plane started stinking of shit. I finished up and cleaned up best I could, but the toilet was done for, it was starting to overflow. I just slowly went back to my seat with the entire plane staring at me. Disclaimer, back in the day there was a small amount of water with chemicals to flush with, much more than there is today. A blocked opening means there's nowhere for the poo to go, and no vacuum to suck the shit down, because it's blocked. The more you press the lever the more chemicals, been saying water, as it was faster to type, get pumped in. With the toilet blocked, there's nowhere for it to go except overflow. Now imagine the amount of paper I had to use to block an airplane toilet, and that's why it was blocked. I had to tell my dad what I had done, and he spoke to the flight attendants who had to try clear the mess of a toilet with the water starting to splash onto the floor. It was horrible. We finally got to Kiribati, and the plane had to be grounded while they disinfected and cleaned the whole plane as it started to sweat as soon as the heat from outside came in. The plane was delayed for a good while. I only remember this as my dad brought it up the other day in convo. He thought I put my undies in the toilet which blocked it. I had to assure him it was all TP and shit. This story needs some context to understand the full surrealism I felt. I come from a fairly sheltered life, from a very small, mostly apostolic Christian town. I'm not apostolic. Well, in about 8th grade, my parents divorced, and my mom moved to a slightly bigger city, and I started to make friends that weren't as PG as I was used to. During my first house party, the summer of 8th grade, I met this guy named Punk Rock Rob. This is an aside, but he had a habit of slinging his dick out, which to this day, dude had the biggest schlong I've ever seen. It was cartoonishly big. Fast forward a couple months and me and one of my friends were going to sneak over to a girl's house and stay the night. Well, her parents caught us sneaking in and of course kicked us out. So we're out in the city in winter with nowhere to go. We couldn't call our parents because we did the whole trope of telling them we were staying at the other's house. It was about that time that we remembered Punk Rock Rob, who was quite a bit older, worked at the Jimmy John's down the road, so we go there and are going to ask for a ride home. Well, he invites us to go to an even bigger city to his friend's house to party. Remember, I'm from a small town, so the idea of going to the city was exciting. He proceeds to drive us into the ghetto to his friend's house, where I proceed to have the craziest night of my life. Apparently, unbeknownst to us kids, Punk Rock Rob belongs to a gang of white supremacists. This immediately made me uncomfortable, but I didn't have a choice but to go with it because Punk Rock Rob was our ride. We were stuck there. They proceed to make us drink more than I have ever drunk before or since that day. They are in the middle of the hood yells singing that song from American History X that the guy in the ice cream truck is singing. In the middle of the hood. I got chased around the hood with a taser that night. One of them stole my shoes. We pass out in this random house. When we wake up, Punk Rock Rob is gone. So we are in this neo-Nazi stranger's house, no way home. I was supposed to be home in a few hours to go with my family to get my picture with Santa. That should give you an idea of how sheltered I was versus what I just experienced. I thought I was going to have to call my very Christian mom to come pick us up from a neo-Nazi gang hang out in the middle of the hood. Luckily, one of our other friends, who could drive, agreed to come pick us up, and that situation was avoided. But that was one of the most life-changing nights of my life in terms of how I perceived the world. Most terrible, surreal night of my life. There was a kid I knew in primary school. I guess I'd call him a friend of mine, but honestly, he was kind of insane, and depending on who you asked, I'm sure some of the teachers would have told you he was bullying me. I got into quite a lot of trouble with him. Well, actually, technically it was mostly him who was getting into trouble, but I ended up in the principal's office so many times having to explain the crazy shit he and I used to get up to. On the one hand, he had a crazy, vivid imagination. He'd spend lunchtime running around the school grounds, pretending to be in the thick of a battle in WW2 against the Germans, getting into epic firefights, etc. But he would get so into it, it was contagious, and I couldn't help but join in. He'd lead me into his imaginary fray, shouting, "Move, move, move, GINA80, get down, private." Then suddenly, at a moment's notice, he'd drop down to the ground and start crawling commando style through some shrubs with the most intense look on his face. And he had this crazy ability to construct very impressive little bases, basically huts, tents in the forest, mostly out of twigs, dead leaves and other stuff he'd just find laying on the ground. Try as I might, I could never build them as well as him. Hanging out with him was always an adventure, because when he got into something he was so into it, and I couldn't help but just join in and have a good time. On the other hand, he also wore steel cap boots to school, would repeatedly remind me that he was wearing steel cap boots, and would kick me in the shins with them to demonstrate. Pretty sure I came home with bruises on my legs multiple times. Pulled a box cutter on me one day on school grounds. Would have random outbursts of extremely aggressive behavior, such as pushing me up against a wall, red-faced and furious, and looking like he was about to lay into me unprovoked. Despite his sudden and frequent mood swings, he was actually a fun kid to hang out with a lot of the time. I'd hang out with him after school, and honestly, I think his mum was happy to see that he'd made a friend, because he tended to push other kids away with his behavior. The lunchtime war roleplay was always a blast, and it was great fun building stuff out of sticks in the bush, just because he got so into everything he did, and it was contagious. Joining in was always a blast. I ended up in the principal's office so often to resolve disputes between us. The principal would often ask why I continued to be friends with the guy. Honestly, my friendship with this kid gave me a little bit of an insight into how abusive relationships might form and how people can end up feeling trapped in them and keep coming back despite their better judgment. He moved to another state after 6th grade, and I never saw him again. He did send me one letter about a month after moving, though. Apparently, he wrote it at his school athletics carnival, told me how he missed hanging out with me, and was gushing about how much fun he was having competing in the events. He wrote that he had just come third in the 100m race and was currently coming second in the 200m race, WTF. I wrote back to him, but he never replied after that. Late one night, my friends and I decided to go buy some weed. These are some of my nerdier friends. We met playing video games online, and we'd play D&D together a lot that summer. So this was a little out of the ordinary for our usual hangout plans. This was also before it was legalized in my state, but I was in high school and we were bored. So the three of us hop in the car and manage to get a hold of my friend's weed guy, a guy he's met like twice, who tells us to meet at a Taco Bell in a town over. So we go, and the Taco Bell is pretty empty at this hour, 10 p.m. suburbia. We get some Taco Bell freeze and wait for the guy. He shows, and we very cleanly head to the car, do the exchange, and split. Easy. So weed guy goes in to eat, and we bounce. We're excited because we're in high school and this is pretty new to us. So we pull out of the parking lot, and my friend merges into the turning lane at the intersection just outside the shopping center at the last second. He forgot we were supposed to turn, so now we're at a 45-degree angle, half in the turning lane, half not. But it's completely empty, so he decides to just make the left turn, even though the light is red through the intersection. Lights, sirens. My other friend is swearing at the driver for being such an idiot, and I'm sitting here thinking no way this is happening. We hadn't smoked anything yet, but the weed smell, even in the bag, was potent, and I could smell it faintly. My life is flashing before me as we pull over, and the driver quickly hands my other friend the weed. Passenger friend wraps it in a rag and throws it in the glove compartment. As I sit there trying to think our way out of this from the back seat, the cop walks up. Shining her flashlight in, she asks the driver if he knows why he was pulled over. Yes. And that it was illegal. Yes. He tells her he thought it was dangerous to be in that position in the intersection, and he naively thought it would be fine to turn with no one around that late in the evening. And out of the blue, she looks at us and says, "Your eyes are looking awful red." I think we all collectively shat bricks. Even though we weren't high, this wasn't looking so good. Suddenly, did she know we had just bought weed? I had to think yes, and that she was staking the place out, so she leans in the car and flashes me with her light. "Why are your eyes red? Have you boys been smoking?" "No, no, no," we all reply. My friend offers to go with her and be blood tested if she really thinks we have been. Skeptical, she pauses for a long while, then returns to her car. We have no idea what's going to happen and why she left abruptly. She comes back and asks us what we are doing in X town when his car is registered to Y city. He hastily describes us going to visit some friends and grabbing some Taco Bell before leaving to go home. This seems to satisfy her, and then she asks for my friend's license and registration. He leans across the center console to open the glove box. The glove box with a huge rag-covered weed bag inside. Fuck. He starts trying to find the registration, fishing around the weed wad, and the cop is standing by the window, flashlight still beaming in on us. I keep waiting for her to ask what's in the rag, or why he doesn't just take it out and find the papers. I know, though, that as soon as that bag left the compartment, it would start to smell. But my friend is actually doing a great job. It's around here somewhere, playing it super cool while pulling out the wrong papers and returning his hand to fish around. My heart is racing. Finally, he finds it. She checks the license, registration, tells us not to do that maneuver ever again, and we go drive off. We were not the type to go and do this shit, so we just nervously laughed our way home. My friend in the passenger seat decided he never wanted to deal with bullshit like that again, and got his weed card shortly after. So I almost got arrested for drug possession, my first time buying weed with my best nerdy friends, and that was some wild shit for a Thursday night. There's a fair chance I'll regret putting this on my main account, but here goes. 100% true, I swear to God. The worst shit I've ever taken. When I was in the army, a friend and I went out and grabbed some pizza, and it was the best pizza I've ever had, at least until that point. I ate a whole pie by myself. My buddy is supposed to meet up with some girl online, who has a friend that is interested in me as well. Things are looking good, but then they say that they can't hang out in town and ask if we can just follow them back to their place because it's only 20 minutes away. We are young and dumb and full of it, so we say yes and start driving into the hollers of Kentucky. About an hour goes by and they pull over. One of the ladies, the one that I was supposed to be paired with, just goes to the back of her truck and pisses for God and all to see. Turns out it wasn't a deal breaker. All I can think of is that I also need to piss badly. So I get out of my car, get to the back and try to piss, but I just can't. Like I'm trying, but nothing will come out. I feel like Tom Hanks in The Green Mile. It hurts like it's never hurt before, and after a minute or 5, I get back in the car, defeated. We keep following them another 30 minutes until we get to their house. Their roommate is a fabulous drag queen, a legit one. They were curling a giant beehive wig and trying out a few makeup techniques before a show. At this point, all I can think about is having to piss and also the sudden need to shit. I go into the bathroom and take what I know to be the biggest shit I'll ever take in my life. It's like wet cement, and it absolutely fills the bowl several inches above the waterline, which was just gone at this point. That's when the piss comes. Apparently my shit was so massive that it was pinching off my piss tubes when I tried before, and now that the women and children were evacuated, it was time to get to the lifeboats. I just pissed into the massive pile, and it was not unlike when you make the mashed potato volcano and put the gravy lava in it. I did my best to wipe, knowing it would be a victory and knowing that if I did flush, their home would be ruined. At this point, I hear a commotion from outside the door, as my friend had apparently started negotiations for a three-way and the talks had gone sour. I hear "Get out of my house," and I realize that we've been given salvation. I go outside, grab my coat and say, "Let's go, dude. Now," and he agrees. We get into my car, start it up, and suddenly their drag queen roommate sprints out of the front door yelling, "What the hell did you do to our toilet?" Oh my God, and I just peel off into the night, laughing my now empty ass off. It was a pretty wild night. It was around 1996-97. I was 14-15 living in a small town in Minnesota. Me and my group of friends had been smoking weed for a few years at this point. One day, a close friend says he knows where there is a field of weed growing on a farm near where we lived. At the time, we were super into Cheech and Chong movies, and the prospect of finding a weed field was just too tempting to pass up. We weren't planning on stealing it all. We really wanted to see a field of weed and grab a few buds on the trip. We wait until the weekend and head out to the farm. It's me and 2 other guys, my friend who told me about it and my girlfriend's little brother. He was a year younger than us. My friend's name started with a D and my girlfriend's younger brother's name started with a B. We passed the long driveway of the farm and parked the car on the road. We began walking towards the cornfields and barn. I'll do my best to describe the lay of the land as it's helpful to the story. The house sat maybe 30-40 feet back from the main road. The driveway was on the right of the house and continued all the way back to a barn that was maybe a half a mile off the main road. Between the house and the barn is a cornfield. As we get closer to the barn and just past the corn, we find a patch of chopped up weed plants on the ground. But it's not buds, it's stems, stalks, and fan leaves. It looks like someone recently had just mowed over the plants, so we start to think maybe they're drying the plants in the barn. This is a 2-story barn that looks out over the cornfield. We enter the barn and there's nothing but a tractor and old farm equipment on the first level. We were all being quiet and searching on our own. So I go up the stairs to the second level. As I'm searching the second level of the barn, I look out the front of the barn and see a pickup truck barreling down the drive from the house to the barn. I yell out, "Run." I knew I didn't have the time to go all the way down the stairs, so I just ran and jumped out the side of the barn. The second level had a large opening on one side. I remember being in the air for much longer than I had ever been before. When I hit the ground, I was already falling forward and just naturally went into a roll. As I got up to run, I could feel pain and stinging in my legs from the jump. I run for the cornfields, and I hear D and B hit the ground behind me. We were split up when we went into the cornfields, so at that point we were on our own. Suddenly, the truck passes the barn and takes a hard left into the cornfields trying to run us over. The truck made a few passes, circled around a bit, and went back to the house. We regrouped after the truck left and walked back to the car. When we got back to the car, the police were there waiting. I had left a growing guide on the floor of the car, and the cop saw it while he was waiting for us to get back. They questioned us as to why we were there. I think we said something about some bike trails we were looking for. They let us go with a trespassing warning. I'll never forget that day and the feeling of flying out of the second story of that barn. I wish I knew how high it actually was. I'm 37 now and still good friends with Dee.
Hey guys, hope you guys had enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And enjoy the rest of your day.